Shalom, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. Today is the eve before Sukkot. And so today, if you're Jewish, you would have been out making sure that you had your four fruits that you needed for the festival itself. I want to read something from Chabad. It's called the Daily Thought. And I have some reasons for reading it, but this is what I want to get across. That force that holds electrons in their orbit and planets in theirs explodes incessantly within the stars above and in the darkness that fills the empty space. The force is a single whole, and it is God. It is not all of God, it's an expression of God. All of it could disappear in a single instant, and for him, nothing would have changed. We're going to talk about change and unchange. So where is it that you can find all of God? Wherever he wishes to be found. On the festival of Sukkot, for example, he hides within some scattered branches that you place upon your autumn roof, the Sukkot. We're going to talk about, again, trying to fill in some spaces that I've left in our discussion last week on reincarnation. Understand it is not an easy concept. And in some ways, I've spent the last year building up for this. I've talked with you over a long period of time about different aspects in the Bible. We've looked back at history and civilizations, understanding scientific research that's happening. We've also drawn from some Jewish commentaries, the ideas regarding prophetic times that we're living in and talking about the end of days. Well, this one is the, I don't know, culmination of all of that. We're both were amazing scientists that we studied. One was Leonardo da Vinci and the other one was Nikola Tesla. Now, I brought those two people together because, well, first off, they each had strange experiences. We know that Da Vinci found himself putting into his artwork alien beings. We found in our understanding of Tesla experiments and processes that had never been thought about at this point in time. And he led us into an understanding of energy, frequency, and that whole concept, which leads us into what life and death is about as we go through this. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I've really been attempting to get the subject, give some little information. The first week we talked about heaven and hell, not from the perspective of Jews, but from the cultures and the civilizations all around, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Armenians, the Syrians, all of the different cultures that probably added up together to create what Christianity has understood to be life and death and heaven and hell. Well, tonight I want to talk about the soul. I want to talk about where we came from, where we're going to, will be next week when we get into the real discussion of the afterlife. But for tonight, I want to first off begin by defining the soul. Now, the soul itself is something that we received from Adam. Not Adam and Eve, but Adam. You see, in the beginning, I want you to look back at chapter 2 in the book of Genesis, and I want you to look at the 7th verse. Okay? So go back in your Bibles, and I want to start there because this is the key to what's going on. Chapter 2, verse 7. Hopefully you're there. Let me begin. And Hashem God formed. Now in chapter 1, he created or made. This is getting into the more specific way it was done. He formed man out of the dust of the ground. Now, the dust of the ground, if you go back to the Jewish sources, is not just one ground from one place. He took dust and dirt from the world because Adam, when he's done procreating all of our beings, can be found on every continent. And so he begins by forming him out of every dust from all the different places. And he blew into his nostrils the soul of life. So Adam originally had the soul. The soul that you and I have now is only a part of that original soul. That's hard to understand. And so we'll probably keep bringing it up as I go through. But the understanding has to be that God put a soul in Adam. Now, Adam, again, is really the word Adam means man. So God put into man, not Eve. He put it into Adam. Eve has not yet been formed. Only Adam has been formed. And so Adam has what we would call the combined soul of all the beings that ever have lived or ever will live. They all came from him. The original Adam, if you go to Midrashic writings, is really different than you and I. First off, he lost what we would call his original form. His hand supposedly was webbed, more like a glove. His skin, his body, was not as thick as ours. It was transparent or translucent. Light permeated his body. That's the light that has been hidden for a long time because God replaced it with sun, moon, and stars. But this light that we're talking about then is the light that came from this soul that was within Adam. Adam was not a small creature, according to the Midrash. He was as big as the world. He shrunk in size because of the event of eating of the fruit. Adam in the very beginning was going to be alive forever. Only with the eating of the fruit, remember, was he cursed with the idea that he would not live more than a day. And we understand that a day at that point in time was 1,000 years. So his being itself contained all of us. But after eating from that fruit, after that point, his soul shattered. By that, his soul became pieces. And those pieces are what occupies you and I. We have a piece of Adam's soul. Now we can find that out by understanding science. If I were to take a look at a single cell, whether it's in my eye or whether it's in my stomach or wherever it's at, each soul contains those genes which give us all of our being. We begin with the idea that each cell then is chemically contains both a female and a male. Because after he was created, after he had named all the animals, God said it wasn't good that he should be alone. So he created Eve, but he didn't create Eve. He formed her out of his side. So she, like us, was a part of Adam. Her soul, like our soul, came from Adam. All of us possessed that part of his soul. Now that it is completely shattered, in fact, there's a lot of understandings that not only was it shattered, but we have what's called the shattering of the vessels, which is what composes the entire universe. But I'll get to that later. So everything about us was found originally in Adam. Adam was both male and female. We have the potential for male and female, but we're one or the other. That's based on our chromosome. In the book of Sanhedrin 38b, let me read it to you. Adam's body stretched from one end of the universe to the other. Because he was unified and not divided by the knowledge of good and evil, Adam's body was not as it is today. Again, according to the Talmud, Adam's fingers were webbed together, creating a mitten, which comes from the understanding of Aleph, which is the Aleph, only at 1,000. Aleph 256 to 58. His skin was more transparent or translucent, like our fingernails are today. Yalkut Shimone 1527. And it was taught that his body radiated greater light than that of the sun. Takune Zohar Bava Batra 86 or 58b. So he was different. The cost of eating of that fruit is what we now are going through. Because you see, we have within us, not because of our immoral actions, although we do have them, it was built into our system. When we read Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says that we were formed, or that Adam was formed. Now, the word for formed is yetzar, yetzar. And yetzar is spelled unusual. It begins with two yuds. The writers and the sages all begin to understand that the two yuds stand for Yetzer Ra, which is our evil inclination, and Yetzer Tov. So built into each of us, or built into Adam, was that difference, the evil and the good inclination. Now, before he ate from the fruit, Adam only knew good. Everything was clear. Everything was perfect. He understood what was good or what was right and what was wrong. By eating the fruit, he ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, what does the knowledge of good and evil bring? It brings two sides. It brings the side of good and the side of evil. How often do we find ourselves now dealing with conversations of what is right and what is wrong? We can't say any more about what politics is all about. The idea of different genders, the idea of all of those things that they argue over, abortion and everything else, good and evil. In the world to come, what we will finally live in, there'll be no more Talmud. Because you see, the Talmud takes it from multiple points of view. When we reach the end, everything will be clear to us. Everything will go back to what it should be. We will all understand what is right, and we will all be able to explain it. So Adam himself has gone through some things. So as the Arizal says, Sheveret HaKelim, the shattering of our vessel. That's what's happened to us. Our point, our purpose, let me give you this. Why are you here? It's not easy to understand, but let me put it this way. We are to transform the darkness that we now have within us into light. We can't do it by ourselves. We have to do it with God, and we do it with the help of each other. But our mission, whether you're a mechanic or whether you're a doctor or whether you're just retired, it makes no difference. We all have the problem of trying to reach the light that originally was with Adam. If you want to think of it differently, you might think of it in this form. Every one of us is a part of the original Adam. We weren't all the eye. All of us weren't the nose. We weren't all the heart. We weren't all the fingers. We were all different parts. When we finally rectify ourselves and enter into Gan Eden and the afterlife, we help to put back together Adam. We help to bring ourselves to completion. That's our point. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Now, as we go through this, we have to understand that there's a lot of things that we're not really going to understand well. because of the fact that when we looked at the original Bible and we looked at the first 5 books, there was no heaven and hell. There was no easy answers. All we have is what we can seduce or deduce from what's there in the text. And we also depend upon scholars. Now, we could depend on any kind of scholar. I choose to depend upon the Jewish scholar. First off, he reads it better than I do, and he begins to understand the differences of words that I can't possibly understand. But our purpose, according to them, is to raise our internal spark, that which came from Adam. That's what we're to do. The questions we all have is, how can we do that? And the answer is not simple, because it's hard to do. And that's do everything that's right. Now, how do you do everything right when you have the idea of good and evil within you? You ever think about that? How many decisions have you made that you changed your mind after you got started because you thought that you were on the wrong track? How often do we find ourselves dealing with, we go to other people or they ask other people for opinions, and we use those other opinions to help us find our way. Now, we usually don't go to a bank robber, or we don't go to a murderer, or we don't go to those people that we know are on the wrong track. But again, we're all searching for the right track. We're all attempting to be good. Our purpose then is to complete ourselves, completing ourselves. I can't control my environment. God put me here. I can't even control who my parents were. I cannot control what genetically I'm made of. All of that came from mom and dad and God. All I have control over is what I think and what I do. That is me. You were the same way. Understanding that we're going to make mistakes. And because we make mistakes, we need to rectify them. We need to fix them. In Hebrew, that means tikkun. Tikkun means to rectify. We rectify our mistakes. In looking at a person, we tend to think in terms of heaven and hell. But I want you to now think in terms of Gehenna and reincarnation, Gilgulim. Because you see, well, let me put it this way. God made us, God is infinite, but we're not. We're finite. Imagine, if you will, that you make enough mistakes. Will God make you go to hell, where you will spend the rest of your life burning? Will you spend the rest of your life in misery? Why would a God who's infinite do that to something that's finite? That was my biggest problem I was having for the longest time, until I understood God doesn't want anyone to fail. God wants us all to pass through, to survive. Now, there was going to be some who will fail, and I'll get to those later. But you and I are on a trail where we want to succeed. We want to make it there. And so we have to have a way to make up for our mistakes, to correct ourselves in some way, shape, or form, or allow God to correct us. And so that's some of the things that he does. Now, part of that then means that probably you're like me, you're an old soul, meaning you probably have been here before. No, I don't mean you were in the same place. I can't even guarantee that. I can't even guarantee you had the same parents. I can't even guarantee you had the same spouse. Now, there's some of us that have been connected before. In other words, there's commonality between some of us. And that commonality is what allows us to draw together, to depend on one another. Not that we're all living in the state of Texas. In fact, none of you are living in the state of Texas. I'm sorry. You're all lost and you're all going to hell. But for me, Texas is never mind. That's a bad statement. Our intent and purposes is to be rectified. You and I are the last generation before the end of days. I truly believe that. In the Jewish understanding, we are the heel. We're the bottom. We're the last. The interesting thing about being a heel is the fact you support the rest of the being. You also provide the strength to keep it standing. The heel is so significant. Our main challenge in walking towards God today is the fact that we have to walk around so much else. So many things going on around us that you and I both understand are not good. We must often force ourselves to depend on faith. Normally, we like to depend upon ourselves. We're the answer, or we think we are. But if you want to move towards God, you have to depend upon it in faith. You have to have the faith that you're moving towards God. God has to be your encourager. God has to bring you closer. An interesting form of reincarnation is called, it's called Ibur, Abur Neshashama, which is the impregnation of a soul. You and I each have been impregnated. We have a soul within us. Now, this may be my second body, my third body, my 1,000th body. I have no idea. Sometimes I think I know more than I know. Sometimes I think I can remember some of you from my previous life, but that's usually through a dream or something like that. There was one character that's in the Bible. His name was Pincus, or Pinhas, whichever you want to pronounce it. In the Bible, in the book of Numbers, he was identified as being the son of Aaron's child. But in another place, he is Aaron's son himself. He was in a situation where he was trying to stop a plague. The plague had been killing thousands of people. It was started by the Moabites and the Midianites, who brought their women together and they began to coax the Jewish men into their tents and cause all kinds of things to happen. Moses didn't know what to do. Aaron didn't know what to do. The council didn't know what to do. Pincus grabbed a spear and went out and harpooned Simon or Simeon and Cosby and brought them out of the tent, at which time the plague ended. But he couldn't do it alone, you see, because he needed the help of another being. Who did he need the help of? Well, the Arizal says he needed the help of Nadav and Avihu, the two boys of Aaron, who ended up creating a special fire that they took before God, and God took them at that point in time. Our rabbis, or the rabbis, use the term Olam Haba a great deal to refer to the afterlife, the place where we will go. They also use other words. They use the word Gan Eden. Those are the words they use. They don't use heaven. I remember the story of Billy Graham going to Israel to try to preach to the Jewish people and bring them to Christ. Well, he started through his speech and he got to the point of talking about heaven. And he had an interpreter. And the interpreter, when he got to that word heaven, quit. Billy Graham stood there for a while and tried to figure out, well, what's wrong? He asked him, and he says, well, what's heaven? You see, in Hebrew, there is no such thing as, well, there is heaven. In fact, there's 7 of them. But that's not where people go. That's not where people go. Remember when I was talking about heaven and hell last week, and I was talking about the Greeks and the Romans and how they have created for us hell or an understanding? Well, in the case of the Jews, the best they could come up with is a place called B'nai Hinnom. B'nai Hinnom. But that's a place, and it's not in heaven, and it's not below the earth. It's just a place, a valley, in which, well, in the end, it ended up being a trash heap before the Romans conquered it. Before that, it was a place for sacrifice. But that was the best that they could come up with, because even they understood this isn't the place where we end up, nor is hell. But they call it Gehenna. Now in the Bible, and you don't have to turn to it, I'm going to read to you from Kohelet. Kohelet is Ecclesiastes, and it's chapter 12 and it's verse 7. It begins by saying, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Why does he say the dust returns to the earth? Adam was dust that was formed together. And the idea of the fact that this dust then returns to the earth, doesn't matter where it happens, it just becomes part of it. But the spirit returns to God. But notice he doesn't give it a name. We name things, but oftentimes the scriptures do not. Now, as we're going through this, I want to talk a little bit about science again. I don't know how many of you understand the first law of thermodynamics. I can see the good look on your faces. The law of thermodynamics is also known as the law of conservation of energy. This first law basically says nothing can be created or destroyed, only its form changed. So when it returns to dust, all it is changing form. Nothing has been created, nothing has been destroyed. The entire universe, as we now know it, has been the same all the time. The only difference is the form that it's taken. Remember, Tesla talked to us about 3 things that are very significant, and one of them was energy. Another one was frequency. As you begin to understand science and as you begin to understand how we're made, you understand the fact that you and I right now are basically energy. You and I, when we die, if that's an appropriate word at this point, our form changes. But that same thing holds true with the spirit. The spirit can never be created and never can be destroyed. We return to where we came from, according to Solomon. Physical energy. That's what we are. That's where we're at. You know, while we're here, our body goes through numerous stages of life. In fact, next week, I want to talk to you about Jonah and how Jonah is a good example of what I'm going to talk about tonight. You know, holy, we have a spiritual existence, just as we have a physical existence. And we are remaining in this form that we now have, having come from God, where we will return. Now, some of us will come back again. Some of us, because of our perfection, will never need to come back. I'm sure you people will never have never come the first time, but I'm finding myself to be one of those that came, well, never mind. The soul is always a part of the physical life. But when the spirit or when the physical flesh dies, the soul does not. It simply returns. After the death, Some of us almost come back almost immediately to redo our lives. Remember last time when we were reading in the book of Job? Maybe once, twice, three times we can return. And as we read Kohelets, as we read Ecclesiastes, we can return up to 1,000 times. What causes us to come back? It's the opportunity. The opportunity to do what? To get better. The opportunity to become more illuminated. The opportunity to fit directly into Adam, to help light up the world, if you will. Now, post-life, we'll probably spend a little bit of time in paradise. Now, paradise is what Christianity and many of the religions call it. But the idea is that in this particular place, it's a physical place. It's not a spiritual place. Remember when, if you're a Christian, you remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross? Next to him was a thief who repented. Remember that? When it was all said and done, where did Jesus tell him he would go?
Paradise.
Tonight, you'll be with me in paradise. Not heaven, not hell. You'll be with me in God Eden, in paradise. Because you see, that's where Adam started out. Remember? He was created and placed into the garden. The garden was paradise. That's where he went to. Now, in the final stage, which we're about to enter, it's called the world to come. It's called the Olam Haba. And after that's going to come the resurrection, and we're going to see a new world, a world that'll be far different than what we've been used to. Because you see, we're in a world now where everything is binary. Male, female, right, wrong, black, white, all of it. Gan Eden, for practical purposes, is the place of bliss. It's the existence of God, of Adam and Eve before the fall. That's where we're going. And generally, it is believed that Gan Eden, the human soul, exists in a disembodied. In other words, we don't have the body of a physical being there. Our body would probably be more like Adam's body before the fall. One interesting story that I found in the Talmud talks about this idea of the world to come. There was a rabbi whose son's name was Joseph ben Levi, died. Not completely, because he returned again. It's kind of like those stories we oftentimes hear about somebody who passed away and they spent some time in heaven and they came back. Well, he went away and he came back, and his father would ask him, "What did you see?" He replied, "I beheld a world of reverse of this one. Those who were at the top here were below there, and vice versa." Now his father said to him, "My son, you have seen the world correctly. The world is not based upon rank that we have now. The world will be far different. Those who are superior may have been inferior. But what makes them superior is their closeness to God, the brightness of their light that they bring. Remember, everyone is supposed to be trying to do that. In Kabbalistic tradition, there's much that's mentioned about the voyage of the earth, a voyage of man, and how we go through stages in life. And again, that's Jonah that we're going to talk about next week. Truly righteous souls can go directly to the Garden of Eden, but the rest of us go through reincarnation. Not because we're completely evil, but we haven't finished our task. We haven't drawn in all the light we're supposed to have. That's what we're about. Now, there are some that have to go, because of their evilness, have to go to Gehenna right away. There they spend up to 12 months rectifying themselves. Now, the rectification there may be harsh for some, because they do call it a burning fire. They don't call it hell. But again, they have to be purged of those evil portions within them. And so they go through this process. And after 12 months, or 11 months is what they hope for. Remember, if you've ever been to a Jewish home, you know, if you look up in the corner of one of the rooms, you're going to find candles that had been lit. And especially if they've died within the year, because every night they will relight the candle. And again, they would go through what's called Kaddish or Kaddish, in which they would pray for that soul going through that process. God is good. And an infinite God does not treat a finite person as we would treat each other. If I were to take a look at Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin or Mao Zedong or Jack the Ripper, I probably would have condemned them to hell forever. But that's not God. That's not a merciful God. That's not the God that I serve. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to come back and be real wholesome people. In fact, some people have to come back as a rock. In other words, they have to move through the chain of events from a rock to a plant to an animal to a person. 4 levels that they may have to go through. I pity those who are at the rock level now, because if we're that close to the end, their soul will never complete it, the journey. That will be their loss. Mysticism is kind of interesting. It's Kabbalah. It's the study of those things that are spoken quietly, secretly oftentimes, and the understanding of the afterlife really is a secret that you have to peel the layers back in order to begin to understand what's going on. Now, in our Bibles, if you're reading a Jewish Bible, you go through 2 sections, Parshiot Bahar and Bekkatai. Both of those are in the book of Leviticus. And they deal with rewards and consequences, rewards and curses. But in every case, those rewards are all physical. Rain in its season, good crops, all kinds of things are good. Or they're all curses, and they are again. But the understanding is that's not what we're working for. That's only a temporal thing. Ours is much deeper than that. The Jewish thought that they understand the afterlife is going to be spent in Gan Eden. That's where we're working for. We wish to be there. There's no mention anywhere in the Torah of a spiritual Garden of Eden. Where this garden is, I have no idea. But it is here somewhere. But again, we're only on the physical level. There are far more levels of understanding than just the physical. So, as I'm beginning to think about this, I ran into another section. There was a rabbi named Yehuda Hanassi. Yehuda Hanassi is from the family of David. He would, at the time, help to organize what we would call the Mishnah and the Talmud. Well, he was so influential that the Roman emperor at that time, who was Antonius, became a follower or a student, so to speak. Now, he didn't go all the way because he still saw himself as being Caesar, but they had many interesting conversations. In the Sanhedrin, in the book of Sanhedrin 91 A and B, the story is continued from A to B. Antonius asked, the body and the soul can both free themselves from judgment. Thus the body can plead. The soul has sinned since from the day that it left me, and I lie on a dumb stone in a grave. So while the soul can say the body has sinned from the day it departed from me, I fly freely like a bird. In other words, once Antonius said he would die, well, then I don't have to sin anymore, and therefore I'm free as a bird. Well, the rabbi responded this way: I tell you a parable. To what may this be compared? To a human king who owns a beautiful orchard, which contained splendid figs. Now he appointed 2 watchmen, one lame and the other blind. One day the lame man said to the blind, I see beautiful figs in the orchard. The word for orchard is also the word for paradise. Come and take me upon your shoulders, that we may procure and eat them. So the lame strode to the blind. They procured and ate them. Sometime after, the owner of the orchard came and inquired of them, where are those beautiful figs? Well, the lame man cried, do I have feet to walk with? A blind man replied, do I have eyes to see with? What do you do? Or what did he do? He placed the lame man on the blind man's shoulders, and he judged them both. So will the Holy One, blessed be he, bring the soul and place it in the body and judge them both. So at the very end, there will be a judgment. Okay, the most frequently asked questions. If I've been here before, which of us is going to be judged? And the answer is you both are, or both of me, or the 3 of me, or the 1,000th of me will be judged. But you see, the difference is that I will have gotten better with each and every appearance in a body. Because you see, that's what God is asking us to do, is to get better. Some of us never had to go through this. Some of us will go through this multiple times. Rabbi Yehuda replied to a wonderful parable and concluded that God brings the body and the soul together again and judges the person and bestows upon them their due rewards. Because you see, I don't do everything evil in this world. I do have things that I need to be rewarded for, just as my other beings needed to be rewarded, as well as those things that I have sinned. When we were studying on a Sunday mornings, I was studying the book of Job. In the book of Job, Job finally understood that the reason he was being punished over a course of 12 months, the reason he was being punished was not necessarily for the sins of this being, but to cure him and to do away with those things that would hinder him from being rewarded in the next world. You and I may be going through some experiences. We may have problems physically or emotionally that are brought upon us because of what had happened in the past. But God is dealing with them now so that we don't have to worry about them later. That what will be left will be the reward. That's God. I'm going to be done now. There's more I can talk about, but I don't feel like I don't want to go much farther because I think you probably have some thoughts or questions that you want to ask. And again, I am not an expert in everything. I've done more reading than you have. So basically, what you're getting is a lot of my understanding from what I've read. I have a book called Life After Life that I've been using by Dov Bear Pinson, Shar Hagagulim, which is the writings of the Arizal, and articles that I've read from various sources. So those are the sources by which I have created my understandings at this point. So if you have questions, I may not answer it completely, but at least you got to start.